James Reed was 11 years old when his father disappeared. He remembered that day like it was yesterday, even though 30 years had passed. His father, Captain David Reed, was a naval officer. He was a good man, strong and kind. That morning, he had kissed James on the forehead before leaving for his ship. "I'll be back in 3 days," his father had said, smiling. "We'll go fishing just like I promised." But David Reed never came back. The ship was called the Pioneer. It was on a simple research mission in the Atlantic Ocean. Nothing dangerous, nothing unusual, just collecting water samples and checking the ocean floor. The weather was clear. The equipment was working perfectly. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. The last radio message came at exactly 3:47 in the afternoon. James's mother had told him about it years later, when he was old enough to understand. His father's voice had been calm but confused. "We're seeing something in the water," he had said. "Something large. Something that shouldn't be here." Then the radio went silent. No distress call. No emergency signal. Nothing. The Pioneer simply vanished from all tracking systems. It was as if the ship had never existed. The Navy searched for 2 weeks. They sent planes, ships, and diving teams. They covered thousands of square miles of ocean. They found nothing. No wreckage. No debris. No bodies. The ocean had swallowed the Pioneer and its crew of 12 men without leaving a single trace. James grew up with that empty space in his life. Other kids had fathers who came to their baseball games and helped with homework. James had questions without answers. He had a mother who cried quietly at night. He had a bedroom full of memories of a man who was gone. But James never stopped believing. While other people said his father was dead, James felt something different. He couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling deep in his heart that his father was still out there somewhere. That feeling shaped his entire life. He studied hard in school. He read every book about the ocean he could find. He learned about currents and depths and all the mysteries hidden beneath the waves. When other teenagers were playing video games, James was studying oceanography. His mother worried about him. "You need to let go," she would say gently. "You need to live your own life." But James couldn't let go. Finding his father became his purpose. It became the reason he woke up every morning. He went to the best university. He earned his degree in marine science. Then he earned another degree. And another. He became an expert in deep-sea exploration. He learned to pilot submersibles and operate sonar equipment. He spent years studying the exact area where his father had disappeared. People thought he was obsessed. Maybe they were right. But James didn't care what people thought. He had a mission. Now, 30 years after that terrible day, James stood on the deck of a research vessel called the Explorer. He was 41 years old. His hair was starting to show gray at the temples. He had spent more time underwater than most people spent on land. And he was finally here, at the exact coordinates where his father had vanished. The ocean was calm today. The water was a deep blue, almost black in the distance. James could see dolphins jumping in the distance. They had been following the ship for 2 days now, which was unusual. Dolphins were curious creatures, but they didn't usually follow ships for this long. "You ready?" Kate Morrison asked. She was the pilot of their submersible. She was 30 years old, brilliant with technology, and didn't believe in mysteries. She thought everything had a logical explanation. "I've been ready for 30 years, James said quietly. Their third team member walked over. Professor George Hamilton was 72 years old. He had white hair and wore thick glasses. He had been a young scientist when David Reed disappeared. He remembered the search efforts. He remembered the confusion and sadness. "The sonar is picking up something unusual," George said, looking at his tablet. "There's a large structure on the ocean floor. Very large. And the dolphins seem to be swimming in circles around this exact spot." James felt his heart beat faster. This was it. He could feel it. "Let's go down," he said. Kate nodded and started the submersible's engines. The small vessel was equipped with the latest technology. It had powerful lights, cameras, and equipment for collecting samples. It could dive to depths that would crush a normal ship. As they prepared to descend, James looked out at the ocean one last time. Somewhere down there in the cold darkness was the answer to the question that had haunted him his entire life. What happened to his father? And was there any chance at all, that he was still alive? The submersible descended slowly into the darkness. James watched through a small window as the sunlight faded away. First the water was blue, then green, then a deep gray. Finally, everything turned black except for the lights from their vessel. Kate controlled the submersible with steady hands. She had done this hundreds of times before, but even she seemed nervous today. Something about this dive felt different. Depth is now 1,000 feet, she announced. All systems normal. George was watching his screens carefully. The sonar showed the ocean floor below them, but it also showed something else. Something that made no sense. The dolphins are still with us, George said, surprised. They're diving with us. I've never seen dolphins go this deep before. James pressed his face against the window. He could see shapes moving in the darkness outside. Fast, graceful shapes. The dolphins were swimming alongside them, as if they were escorts, as if they were guiding the submersible to something specific. 1,500 feet, Kate said. Bottom should be coming up soon. The lights from the submersible cut through the dark water. Small fish scattered as they passed. The pressure outside was enormous. It would crush a human body instantly. But inside the submersible, they were safe. 2,000 feet, Kate announced. Then she stopped talking. She was staring out the window, her mouth open. James looked where she was looking. At first, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. His brain refused to accept it. There, on the ocean floor, was a massive structure. It was shaped like a perfect triangle. Each side was enormous, maybe 500 feet long. The metal was smooth and dark, almost black, but it wasn't covered in rust or barnacles like sunken ships. It looked brand new, as if someone had placed it there yesterday. That's not natural, Kate whispered. That's definitely not natural. And it's not human either, George added. His voice was shaking slightly. No country on Earth has technology like that. The dolphins were swimming in a perfect circle around the structure, around and around, like they were protecting it, or maybe guarding it. James felt his heart pounding. This was it. This was what his father had seen. This was what had made him say those final words. Something that shouldn't be here. Take us closer, James said. Kate hesitated. James, maybe we should report this first. Maybe we should go back up and... Closer, James repeated firmly. Kate swallowed hard and pushed the controls forward. The submersible moved toward the triangle slowly. As they got nearer, James could see details. The structure had circular openings along its surface. They looked like portholes or windows, but much larger. I'm getting strange readings, George said, tapping his screen. Electromagnetic pulses. Very faint, but definitely there. This thing is active, as if responding to their presence. The circular openings began to glow. A soft amber light came from inside the structure. It grew brighter as they approached. It knows we're here, Kate said. Her hands were gripping the controls tightly. Then something moved. One of the larger openings began to change. Something was coming out from inside the triangle. Back up, Kate shouted, pulling the controls. But James put his hand on her arm. Wait, he said. Just wait. A smaller craft emerged from the opening. It was also triangular, but much smaller than the main structure, maybe 30 feet across. It moved through the water smoothly, effortlessly, like it wasn't affected by the pressure or the currents. The craft came straight toward them. The dolphins moved aside to let it pass, but they stayed close. They were still swimming in formation, still watching. This is insane, Kate breathed. This is absolutely insane. The small craft stopped right in front of their submersible. It was close enough to touch. James could see patterns on its surface, like writing or symbols, but they weren't in any language he recognized. Then the craft began sending out pulses. Their equipment registered them as complex electromagnetic waves, patterns of energy that seemed organized, deliberate. It's trying to communicate, George said in awe. Or it's scanning us. Maybe both. The dolphins responded. They began making clicks and whistles and patterns that matched the pulses from the craft. Back and forth, the craft and the dolphins exchanged signals. They're translating, James realized. The dolphins are acting as translators between us and whatever is in that craft. For several minutes, this strange conversation continued. The craft pulsed. The dolphins responded. Then the craft pulsed again. It was like watching a conversation in a language that existed before words. Then suddenly, the small craft moved even closer. A part of its surface began to extend outward, reaching toward their submersible. It looked like a docking mechanism. It wants to connect with us, James said quietly. No way, Kate said immediately. Absolutely not. We have no idea what will happen. But James was already unbuckling his safety harness. He looked at the craft outside, at the dolphins circling, at the massive triangle structure behind it all. My father saw this, he said. This is what happened to him, and I'm going to find out why. The argument lasted 10 minutes. Kate insisted they should return to the surface and report what they found. She said connecting to an unknown craft was too dangerous. She was right, of course. Any reasonable person would agree with her. But James wasn't thinking like a reasonable person. He was thinking like a son who had spent 30 years searching for his father. I'm going across, James said firmly. You two can stay here. Not a chance, George said, surprising everyone. The old professor stood up slowly from his seat. I've studied mysteries my whole life. I'm not missing this one. Kate looked at both of them like they were crazy. Maybe they were. But finally, she sighed and nodded. Fine, she said, but I'm monitoring everything from here. If anything goes wrong, I'm pulling you back immediately. And if I don't hear from you in 30 minutes, I'm going to the surface and calling for help. James and George put on lightweight diving suits as a precaution. The suits would protect them if something went wrong with the pressure. Kate ran tests on the connecting tube that the craft had extended to their submersible. The tube is sealed, she reported, and there's air inside. Breathable air. Actually, it has more oxygen than normal Earth air, but not enough to be dangerous. They've made it safe for us, George said quietly. They're expecting visitors. James took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything in his life had led to this point. He opened a hatch and stepped into the connecting tube. The tube was short, maybe 15 feet long. The walls were smooth and gave off a faint blue light. James could feel his heart pounding as he walked. Behind him, George followed slowly. At the end of the tube was another hatch. It opened automatically as they approached. James stepped through into the craft. The chamber inside was small, but comfortable. The ceiling was just high enough for James to stand up straight. The walls displayed images that seemed to move and change. Stars, planets, ocean scenes. It was beautiful and strange at the same time. In the center of the room was a console with symbols that glowed when touched, but James barely noticed it. His attention was fixed on something else. Along one wall was a collection of items, personal items, human items. James walked closer, his legs feeling weak. A watch, a compass, a journal with a worn leather cover. James knew these things. He had seen them in photographs. His mother had kept pictures of his father wearing that watch. His father had always carried that compass. And that journal. His father had written it every day. James, George said softly. His voice was shaking. Look. James turned. At the far end of the chamber was a transparent pod, like a glass coffin, and inside the pod was a man in a naval uniform. The man looked exactly like the pictures James had memorized. Dark hair, strong jaw, the same uniform his father wore in the last photo taken before he disappeared. But that was impossible. 30 years had passed. The man should be older, should have gray hair, should have wrinkles. But he looked exactly the same as the day he vanished. James walked toward the pod slowly. His hands were trembling. He pressed his palm against the glass. It was cool to the touch. "Dad," he whispered. The pod began to make a soft humming sound. The glass started to turn transparent. Then it slid open. The man inside took a sudden breath. like someone waking from a deep sleep. His eyes opened. For a moment, David Reed looked confused. He stared at the ceiling, then at James and George. His eyes were unfocused, like he didn't understand where he was. Then his gaze locked onto James. His eyes went wide. "Who?" David started to say. Then he stopped. He looked at James more carefully, at his face, at his eyes. "James!" David whispered. "But that's not possible. You're a child. You're only 11 years old." James felt tears streaming down his face. He couldn't speak. He could only shake his head. David sat up slowly in the pod. He looked at his own hands, turning them over as if checking to make sure they were real. Then he looked back at James. "How long?" David asked. "How long has it been?" 30 years, James managed to say. "You've been gone for 30 years. David's face went pale. He looked at James again, really looked at him, at the man his son had become, at the gray starting to show in his hair, at the lines on his face. "My God," David breathed, "you're older than I am now." Father and son stared at each other across a gulf of 3 decades. James had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality, for seeing his father young and unchanged while he himself had grown into middle age. "What happened to you?" James asked. "Where have you been?" David stood up from the pod. He was shaky at first, but he steadied himself. He looked around the chamber, at the walls displaying stars and planets. "I have so much to tell you," David said quietly, "about this place, about who built it, about why I'm still alive." David Reed sat down slowly on a bench that emerged from the wall. He looked tired, even though he had just woken from 30 years of sleep. James sat across from him, still trying to understand that this was real. His father was alive. His father was here. George stood quietly in the corner, giving them space but listening carefully to every word. "I need to start from the beginning," David said. His voice was hoarse from not being used for so long. "That day when we disappeared, the weather report said everything was clear, and it was at first. But then a storm came out of nowhere, a massive storm. Our equipment started failing. The engine stopped working. We were taking on water." James leaned forward, listening intently. "We sent out a distress call, but our radio was dead. We were sinking. Son, all 12 of us knew we were going to die. I remember thinking about you and your mother, thinking I would never see you again." David's voice broke slightly. "Then I saw something in the water, something huge moving beneath us. I thought it was a whale at first, but it was too big, too fast." "The triangle," James said. David nodded. "Yes, but I didn't understand what was back then. It rose up from below and surrounded our ship. There was a bright light, and then I don't remember much after that. I woke up here, in this chamber, alone." "What about the other crew members?" George asked quietly. "They're safe," David said. "They were taken home. Their memories were adjusted, so they wouldn't remember what really happened. The storm, the sinking, the rescue by a passing ship. That's what they remember now. They're all alive and well." "But not you," James said. "Why were you different?" David stood and walked to the console in the center of the room. He touched one of the symbols, and the walls came alive with images. Pictures of Earth from space. Pictures of cities and oceans. Pictures of humans doing everyday things. "Because they chose me," David said, "the beings who built this place. They call themselves the Guardians. They've been watching Earth for thousands of years. Watching and waiting." "Waiting for what?" James asked. "For humanity to grow up," a new voice said. James spun around. Standing in the doorway was a figure that made his breath catch. It was humanoid, shaped like a person, but clearly not human. The skin seemed to glow with a soft light. The eyes were larger than human eyes and held a depth that was almost frightening. The figure wore no clothing, but its body was smooth and featureless. "My name, in your language, is Thomas," the being said. Its voice was gentle, almost musical. "I am one of the Guardians. We have been protecting your world for a very long time." George grabbed James's arm for support. The old professor looked like he might faint. Thomas walked into the room slowly, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural. Please do not be afraid. We mean you no harm. We have never meant your species any harm. Then why? James demanded. Why take my father? Why keep him here for 30 years? Thomas looked at David with something that might have been affection. Your father was dying. His ship was sinking in a storm that would have killed him and all his crew. We saved them. We saved him. But your father was special. Special how? James asked. He had qualities we recognized, Thomas explained. Courage, intelligence, compassion, and most importantly, he had a son who would search for him, a son who would dedicate his life to finding the truth. James felt a chill run down his spine. You planned this? All of this? Not planned exactly, Thomas said, but we hoped. We needed a bridge between your world and ours. We needed someone who could help humanity understand what we are about to tell you. The walls around them changed. The images showed other worlds now. Planets with purple skies, cities that floated in the air, creatures that looked nothing like humans but moved with obvious intelligence. Your species is not alone in the universe, Thomas said. There are thousands of intelligent civilizations. We Guardians travel between them, watching and protecting, making sure that young species survive their most dangerous years. Dangerous years? George asked weakly. Yes, Thomas said. There's a period in every civilization's development when they discover powerful technology before they develop the wisdom to use it properly. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, artificial intelligence. This is when species usually destroy themselves. David spoke up. But humanity passed that test. We didn't destroy ourselves. You came close, Thomas said, many times. But you survived. You are still here. And now you are ready. Ready for what? James asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Ready to join us, Thomas said simply. Ready to meet the other civilizations. Ready to take your place among the stars. Your father has been preserved to help guide humanity through this transition. And you, James Reed, were chosen to be the one who brings this message to your world. James sat down heavily. His mind was spinning with everything he had just heard. His father, aliens, other civilizations. It was too much to process all at once. I don't understand, James said finally. Why us? Why choose my father me? Thomas moved closer. The glowing being sat down across from James in a way that seemed almost human, because stories matter to your species. Humans don't just need facts. They need narratives they can understand. They need emotions they can connect to. The being gestured to David, a father taken too soon, a son who never stopped searching, 30 years of dedication and hope, and finally, a reunion that proves humanity is not alone. This is a story your people will understand. This is a story that will help them accept the truth. You're using us, James said, anger rising in his voice. You're using our pain as some kind of public relations strategy. No, David said firmly. He walked over and put his hand on James's shoulder. Son, listen to me. Yes, they chose us for a reason. But my love for you is real. My pride in the man you become is real. The years you spent searching for me, that was real too. They didn't create our bond. They just recognized it. Thomas nodded. We cannot create love. We cannot create dedication. We can only observe it and hope to use it wisely. Your father was in danger, and we saved him. You spent your life searching, and we guided you here. But the emotions, the choices, the determination, that was all human. That was all you. George had been silent, but now he spoke. What happens now? You said humanity is ready to join you. But ready for what exactly? The walls around them changed again. Now they showed Earth from space, beautiful and blue. Then the image zoomed out, showing the solar system. Then further, showing the galaxy. Tiny points of light began glowing across the galaxy. Each of these lights is a civilization that has joined the community, Thomas explained. Thousands of worlds, millions of beings. all working together to explore, to learn, to protect each other from the dangers of the universe. And you want Earth to join this community? James asked. We are inviting Earth to join, Thomas corrected. The choice is yours. We will not force you, but we want you to know that you are not alone. You have neighbors, you have friends, and you have a place among the stars if you want it. David squeezed James's shoulder. They've shown me things, son. Technologies that could end hunger, medicine that could cure diseases, clean energy that could save the planet. They're offering to share all of it. But there's a cost, isn't there? James said, there's always a cost. Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh. You are wise to be cautious. Yes, there's a cost. The cost is responsibility. If you join us, you must agree to protect other young civilizations as you were protected. You must agree to never use your technology for conquest. You must agree to work toward the good of all species, not just your own. That's it. George asked, that's the only condition? It is not a small condition, Thomas said seriously. Many species fail. They join the community, gain access to advanced technology, and then use it selfishly. When that happens, we must intervene. We must remove the technology and return them to isolation until they are truly ready. James stood and walked to the wall showing Earth, his home, his planet. 7 billion people go about their lives, completely unaware that aliens were real, that humanity was being invited to join something bigger. How do we tell them? James asked, how do we tell the world about this without causing panic? Carefully, Thomas said, slowly, with evidence and proof. Your submersible has recorded everything. Your colleague Kate has video of our craft. You have your father as living proof. And you have me. I will come with you to the surface. I will speak to your leaders. I will show them we mean no harm. David walked over to stand beside his son. For a moment, they both looked at Earth on the wall. Father and son, separated by 30 years, but reunited by something impossible. I'm scared, James admitted quietly. So am I, David said, but I'm also excited. This is the greatest moment in human history, and we get to be part of it. Together, Thomas approached them both. The dolphins will guide your submersible back to the surface. I will travel with you, and then we will contact the United Nations. The process will take time, months, perhaps years, but it will happen. Humanity will take its first steps into the larger universe. James looked at his father, really looked at him, the man who had been frozen in time while James grew old, the man who would now help guide humanity into a new era. Will you stay? James asked, after all this, when everything changes, will you stay with me? David pulled his son into a hug, the first hug in 30 years. I'm never leaving you again, David said. I promise. George wiped tears from his eyes. Kate's voice crackled over the radio, demanding to know what was happening. And Thomas stood quietly, watching the reunion with those deep, ancient eyes. The submersible began its journey back to the surface. Inside, a father and son sat together, talking about everything they had missed. 30 years of life compressed into a few hours of conversation. Above them, the dolphins sang their ancient songs. And in the darkness of the deep ocean, the triangle structure remained, silent, waiting, a bridge between worlds that would soon change everything. When explorers surfaced, the sun was setting. The sky was painted orange and red. James and David stood on the deck together, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear. Those stars, David said softly, they're not empty anymore. They're full of life, full of possibility. James smiled. For the first time in 30 years, he felt complete. The empty space in his life was filled. His father was home, and humanity was about to discover it had a much larger family than anyone had ever imagined. Kate and George stood nearby, watching Thomas emerge from below deck. The glowing being looked up at the darkening sky with something like nostalgia. Tomorrow, we contact your world leaders, Thomas said. Tomorrow, everything changes. And tonight? James asked. Thomas looked at the father and son standing together. Tonight, you rest. You have earned it. both of you. As the explorer turned toward home, James Reed thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges. There would be people who didn't believe. There would be fear and resistance and doubt. But there would also be wonder. There would be hope. There would be the knowledge that humanity was not alone. And most importantly, there would be his father, alive, real, here. The mystery that had defined James's entire life was solved. But in solving it, he had discovered something far more incredible. The universe was vast and full of friends. Earth had guardians who had watched over humanity for thousands of years. And now, finally, humanity was ready to meet them. James looked at his father and smiled. David smiled back. No words were needed. They both understood what this moment meant. Not just for them, but for everyone. The stars grew brighter as the night deepened. And for the first time in human history, those stars didn't seem quite so far away.